morning to all, and I'm very pleased to be in this event. I also would like to thank the Asian Development Bank for inviting the ASEAN Secretariat in this important roundtable. As you know, ADB and the ASEAN Secretariat, we both share the same vision of regional economic integration and cooperation, and that is why we find this particular event very appropriate. I would like to frame my comments this morning by looking at regional cooperation and integration in the case of ASEAN, and also within the context of the current global uncertainty. I think this is something that Vice President Lohani has mentioned in his opening remarks. I think as we gather here today, we all know for the fact that global uncertainty is still very high. And ASEAN, like other regions in the world, is not immune in this global uncertainty. In fact, this global uncertainty has made ASEAN more vulnerable because of the fact that ASEAN is very much interdependent with the global economy. And at the same time, this increasing global linkages by ASEAN with the rest of the world have also somehow made regional economic integration in ASEAN more complex and challenging. But my personal view is that despite all these global uncertainties, the fundamentals of regional economic integration in the region continue to remain strong. In fact, the way we look at these global uncertainties and all these global challenges is that these global challenges provide us an opportunity, at least for ASEAN, to work together and to commit more to a regional economic integration. Also, if you look at, for example, the goals of the ASEAN Economic Community, I think the AEC goals have kind of renewed importance in the current global uncertain environment. Because as the global economy continues to struggle out of this crisis, stimulating regional demand or domestic demand becomes an important source of growth for our region on the demand side. On the supply side, it is also very apparent here that facilitating the movement of investment, services, and technology in the region also provides some kind of support in boosting productivity and supply in ASEAN. And that is something that we very much welcome. As the global linkages become more complex, as earlier mentioned also by Dr. Ri here, I think it is also obvious here that that dealing with global uncertainties or even with our domestic challenges cannot be solved alone by individual countries by themselves. As shown in the recent years, for example, in the case of ASEAN, it is through coordinated policy actions among members in ASEAN that we're able to address some of the important problems brought about by this global uncertainty. I think the message is clear, and it bears repeating here, that renewed commitment to integration and cooperation is what we need now, particularly given the current uncertainties in the world today. This commitment to cooperation, in my view, has been something that ASEAN has been able to pursue over the years. In fact, when the ASEAN leaders decided to establish the ASEAN Economic Community in 2003, that is when they made a declaration, various initiatives have been implemented since then, and efforts have been exerted to ensure that cooperation has been done at the utmost level. In fact, to advance economic integration, the ASEAN economic ministers last year signed the first landmark agreement on the movement of natural persons. I think this is something that shows our commitment to further advance integration in ASEAN. This week, the ASEAN economic ministers will be meeting in Hanoi to finally endorse the schedule of commitments that will finally operationalize this agreement on the movement of natural persons. Another important agreement here, and this is also something that was mentioned by the two speakers, is the new Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that ASEAN leaders launched last year during the summit in Phnom Penh. And this RCEP, or this Regional Economic Partnership, is again a commitment by ASEAN to engage with our dialogue partners, particularly the 6 dialogue partners in the region. Last week, the senior officials from ASEAN as well as from the 6 FTA partner countries of ASEAN met in Bali. And during that meeting, we have finalized the terms of reference for the Trade Negotiating Committee, as well as some of the scoping papers that would guide the negotiations for trade in goods, trade in services, and investment. Our CEP, when it is fully negotiated by 2015, is expected to further cement ASEAN's centrality in the emerging regional architecture. Indeed, in my view, the lesson is clear that cooperation is crucial if we want to have a more meaningful regional economic integration. And in my view, an effective policy coordination and cooperation would require two important elements. One important element here is the need for strong political commitment or leadership to further support cooperation. This involves, again, in my view, the ability of countries within the region, particularly in ASEAN, to recognize and to have a clear understanding of the issues around countries in the region. It also involves, more importantly, the ability of countries in the region to come up with regional measures that promote greater cohesion, as well as actions that would further promote actions towards achieving common positions on various regional economic integration issues. Another important element of this effective cooperation and integration in the region is the ability of countries to pursue good policies. And by good policies, what I'm referring to here are policies that would further promote transparency as well as more cooperation in the region. Having said that, I would like now to touch on what I think are three or four important priorities moving forward in order to advance regional economic integration, particularly in ASEAN. In my view, regional integration offers a lot of scope for critical actions. But for these actions to be effective, it is very important for us to prioritize. And that is something what we're doing in the ASEAN right now. Because as you all know, we have implemented over the years a number of important initiatives, but by 2015, we have to make sure that we're able to deliver something more concrete for this economic integration to be workable. One important priority here for us to reach 2015, that is the end goal of economic integration for ASEAN, is to make sure that we're able to address the beyond the border measures. As you know, ASEAN has made a lot of strides as far as abolishing tariffs in the region. But I think the next step now is to make sure that we have important policies that address beyond the border measures. This would include, for example, abolishing or addressing non-tariff barriers in the region. This also involves facilitating trade across countries in ASEAN, as well as harmonizing regulations, laws, and other important regulations that would affect or enhance integration in ASEAN. Again, referring to the non-tariff barriers here, as I mentioned earlier, our economic ministers are meeting this week in Hanoi, and one of the things that they're going to discuss is the need to institutionalize a mechanism that would address non-tariff barriers in the region. This, within ASEAN, is a very important agenda that we want to move and pursue forward. Another important priority action here for ASEAN and to have successful integration in the region is to have some kind of institutional support for integration. By 2015, we envision that once AEC becomes an institution by 2015, it would also require more coherence in terms of the regional laws and regulations to be able to ensure that countries are able to commit to what they have committed so far as AEC is concerned. At the same time, the existence of these different regional laws and regulations should be able to countries to be able to follow through on their commitments. And I think this is something very important. So far, we have in the region an existing dispute settlement mechanism. The task force on the SA has actually met last month to further discuss the next steps forward as far as implementing this dispute settlement mechanism. We have also within the ASEAN Secretariat a new office. It's called the ASEAN Integration Monitoring Office that we set up through the initiative by the finance ministers 2 years ago. The idea is that through this monitoring office, we should be able to keep track of the progress of the various integration initiatives in ASEAN. Because the reality is that, considering all the initiatives that we have implemented so far, I think the most critical thing to recognize now is to what extent these different initiatives have been able to produce concrete results on the ground, particularly for the region. But in my view, I think more is needed, aside from having a strong dispute settlement mechanism, a strong monitoring mechanism. Given the fact that AEC is a market-driven process, we also want to engage more with the private sector. In fact, one of the priorities right now of ASEAN is to make sure that there is a strong mechanism that would engage more productively the market players to ensure that whatever we discuss at the regional level, among the G2G level, we're able to translate those initiatives on the ground, particularly in terms of what the markets need and what the markets would prioritize. And that is the reason, again, that at this week's meeting by the ASEAN economic ministers in Hanoi, where they're going to discuss what would be the most important strategies that ASEAN should be able to implement in order to engage more productively with the private sector. The third priority here that I would like to mention is something to do with strengthening macroeconomic policy coordination. In my view, since regional economic integration is not an end by itself, but it is more like a policy instrument to further promote the development objectives in the region, it is very important and it's very critical that there is a very strong policy coordination in ASEAN. This coordination, in my view, is very important to ensure that there is macroeconomic stability in the region. And having a strong macroeconomics economies in ASEAN should be able also, or should enable as well, countries in the region to capture the full benefits of integration. The role of effective policy coordination should also help countries in the region to mitigate the spillovers arising from global uncertainties, as well as some negative externalities that would have some impact on the way integration in the region has been carried out. Again, we have in the region a number of initiatives that try to promote greater policy coordination. We have the ASEAN surveillance process that we have implemented since 2000. We have within the ASEAN Plus3, the Economic Review and Policy Dialogue that tries to engage more productively on issues among officials in ASEAN Plus3. And also currently, the ASEAN economic ministers are considering the need to institutionalize a peer review mechanism among the trade officials. We have, in fact, developed a concept paper now that will later on implement this trade policy and economic review on the trade side, considering that on the finance side, we already have an initiative that tries to achieve the same effect. Finally, I would like to also mention here the need for strong implementation of AEC initiatives. As I mentioned earlier, we have implemented over the years a number of initiatives since 1993 with the establishment of AFTA. I think what is crucial now, especially as 2015 deadline is fast approaching, is to make sure that we are able to produce something by 2015, some and more credible results. I think one important consideration here is the need to ensure that at the country level, there is an effective implementation of these regional initiatives. One important consideration here also is to make sure that countries are able to incorporate in their national agenda all these regional initiatives that the region is trying to pursue. Capacity building is an important component of this implementation, of enhancing implementation capacity, particularly for countries, for the smaller economies of the region. And at the same time, and as I mentioned also earlier, we need to engage more productively with the private sector and other important stakeholders to make sure that the benefits of economic integration within ASEAN are able to be translated in terms of concrete results and impact to the region. In fact, at the last summit in Cambodia last year, our leaders recognized that 2015 is already fast approaching and that we have to deliver something. That is why our leaders emphasized the need to redouble our efforts in implementing the various initiatives within the AEC. They also emphasized the need to prioritize what ASEAN can deliver by 2015, considering that by 2015 we have to make sure that the credibility of ASEAN is not tarnished by our inability to produce some important results on the ground. Let me conclude. Global uncertainties have again exposed the fact that in an era of globalization, no country is immune to these global uncertainties. I think it is in this light that there is a need for deeper cooperation among countries in the region, including in ASEAN. AEC is an important step for ASEAN to be able to integrate more and more with the global economy. But our integration agenda is more built on being able to engage as well with the rest of the world. Our integration initiative is more outward driven, it's also market driven. At the same time, it is something that is also private sector led. But my personal view is that in order for ASEAN Economic Community to work, we have to make sure that we are able to prioritize and also address important issues that the region should be able to look at. And for my personal view is that implementation is key here. If we want ASEAN economic integration to really work by 2015 and beyond, of course we're not saying here that by 2015 the whole economic landscape in ASEAN will change. We're just simply saying here that by 2015 we should be able to see and observe on the ground some critical elements of market integration. For example, in terms of having an ASEAN single window, in terms of having an ASEAN linkages, some sort of linkages among the ASEAN stock markets, in terms of harmonizing our standards, in terms of having some common standards as well in the region. I think these are important critical results that the region should be able to pursue. And again, it is in deeper cooperation that these results will be achieved. And I'm hoping that by 2015 we should be able to get some more credible results in the region. But again, I would like to emphasize here that we're not saying that everything will be there by 2015. AECs will continue to be a work in progress. But I'm very confident that since countries in the region are very much committed to economic integration, we should be able to move this integration agenda forward in the future. Thank you so much.